Resident Evil Requiem is the newest entry in the long-running franchise. Revealed back in June of last year at Summer Games Fest, we would be introduced to a newcomer to the franchise, Grace Ashcroft, an FBI intelligence analyst. Along with this we would see some essence of the series' roots, as it was revealed that the now-destroyed Raccoon City would be featured in some way. Months later, Leon S. Kennedy was revealed to be the second protagonist of this game, and having a series icon like him in this game brought such huge amounts of hype. And now we come to a little while after launch. The game has become the fastest selling Resident Evil title ever, surpassing 5 million copies sold in just 5 days. In addition to its commercial success, critics gave this game scores of 9 and 10 out of 10 across the board, further cementing this release as an incredible title in the franchise. And now that I have completed the game multiple times and the launch hype has settled, I wanted to thoroughly review the game's story, characters, gameplay, and everything in between. We will see if Grace Ashcroft stacks up compared to the franchise's legendary cast of characters, and if Leon's return to Raccoon City was justified. Let me now welcome you to the survival horror that is my review of Resident Evil Requiem. Resident Evil Requiem is comprised of two characters with two very different styles of gameplay, environments, and atmosphere. Our first character is Grace Ashcroft, the newcomer to the series. She is a mainly inexperienced young woman whose gameplay feels like either Resident Evil 2 Remake or Resident Evil 7, depending on the camera perspective you choose for her. Her sections of this game are terrifying, tense, and classic survival horror. Grace will mainly explore the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, a large and grand sanatorium that in both its level design and atmosphere echoes back to something like the Spencer Mansion from the original Resident Evil. Here, we'll play through typical Resident Evil gameplay. Grace explores the care center, looking for supplies along with puzzle items in order to progress. Grace can find two standard pistols along with the extremely powerful Requiem revolver, which is given to her by Leon Kennedy in their first meeting. Unique to Requiem is the blood crafting system. Grace is able to harvest zombie blood and is able to then combine it with other materials to craft ammo, health items, and other needed supplies. In combat, we can see Grace's lack of experience. She isn't the most adept when using her firearms, and when enemies get staggered, all Grace is able to do is kick or push the enemies to the ground, dealing no damage. Although this is still a great tool for distance, and experienced players will take the time that enemies are on the floor to unload some shots into their stationary heads. Knives can also be found or crafted. These can act as both a melee weapon and as a defense item, or can be scrapped entirely for materials to craft other gear. The hemolytic injector is also a crucial item Grace can find or craft. This allows Grace to instantly kill an enemy from behind or while they are staggered, and in my opinion, this is Grace's greatest asset she has. They're pretty cheap to craft for what they give you, and they not only kill any zombie instantly, but they also prevent this game's toughest enemies from appearing. If a zombie has been killed but not fully destroyed, eventually they will reanimate as a blisterhead, a disgusting and highly aggressive zombie mutation. As their name implies, their heads look like a mound of large swollen blisters, and in Grace's case, these are really hard to take down with her limited arsenal, so it's best to use hemolytic injectors to fully destroy zombies as to prevent any nasty surprises later on. The blister heads are actually very similar in their design to the Crimson heads seen in RE1 Remake, as they both feature very similar gameplay loops. While a lot of that sounds like very standard Resident Evil gameplay, Grace's sections actually break a pretty big survival horror norm. Typically in a standard survival horror game, the player's arsenal will upgrade in power as they play, all while lowering the game's horror factors. Usually, players start off with a handgun, something weak but manageable and with excess ammo, later unlocking a more powerful gun, something like a shotgun, which its firepower is offset by its more limited ammo supply. Then players can usually find a specialty weapon, typically late into the game, a rifle, a grenade launcher, or even a flamethrower. And as the player's arsenal grows, normal enemies become much less of a threat, and thus the scare factor wears off. But in RE9's case, Grace doesn't have this progression system. She gets all of her guns within the first 30 minutes of playing, 2 handguns and the Requiem. Now while the Requiem is a super powerful gun, its ammo is in such limited supply, so it's best used for really tight situations. Players will be mostly using their pistol for the whole game, alongside her other craftable items I mentioned earlier. Even up to the very end of the game, regular zombies pose the same threat they did at the start of the game. And this non-traditional progression of Grace is something I haven't seen many people talk about, and it's a really unique part of RE9's design. I constantly had to make decisions on what items to use and when. Should I craft some handgun ammo or an injector? Should I use my Requiem on these enemies or try to use my regular handgun? And throughout the entirety of Grace's sections, I felt always like I had just barely enough supplies to get by. I really felt like I had a huge excess of bullets or items. In true classic survival horror fashion, not only was bullets and health items limited, but so was my ability to save the game. I chose to play on classic difficulty, meaning for Grace's part of the game, ink ribbons are required to save, which is a classic Resident Evil feature I personally love. And with RE9's crafting system, Grace is actually able to craft extra ink ribbons if needed, which I like. This dance of having to weigh up in your head if you've made enough progress to save, or risking your current progress and entering a new room, is what I love from classic Resident Evil games, and the tension it added to my playthrough was great. Speaking on the game's tension, that's what I want to touch on next. Grace's portion of this game is pure horror. The game's intro is slow, and it really allows the player to fall into the shoes of Grace Ashcroft. The first location we explore, the Renwood Hotel, was really atmospheric and scary, which is only helped by the game's gorgeous graphics. Fidelity wise, this is some of the best the series has probably seen, which only makes it that much more real and terrifying. Renwood's design and purpose overall reminds me of Resident Evil 7's long drawn out intro sequence, which makes sense since this game's director, Koshi Nakanishi, also directed that game. Within this intro scene, we get to see a flashback of young Grace Ashcroft and her mother, returning character Alyssa Ashcroft. Within this flashback, we see some incredible acting from Grace's actress, Angela Saltalbano. Alyssa only makes a brief appearance in this game, yet her death hit me so hard due to how well Grace's actress sells it. Her distraught, agonizing screams sent a chill down my spine and kinda had me tearing up. And this will just be a taster of what Grace's actress could do. Shortly after that flashback, we get the first zombie encounter, and it's a standout here. It was so terribly scary and extremely gory. In just the Renwood section, we can see that RE9 doesn't shy away from showing really gruesome gore right in your face. And to quickly mention it, there is also a great level of gore in the game's combat. Enemies can really fall apart as you fill them with lead, and I really like how there was a sort of visual indicator as to how much you have damaged an enemy. I believe the high levels of gore here is used to shock the player and add a level of realism to the game, which again reminds me of the early hours of Resident Evil 7. We then are introduced to Victor Gideon, the game's main antagonist. He is first presented with classical music being present, which I loved. His dirty, greasy appearance gives him this shady kind of presence, which is dead on, as he once worked under Oswald E. Spencer on the T-Virus. Cutting back to Grace's main location she explores, the care center is in my opinion one of the best designed main locales in a Resident Evil game in a very long time. It feels much more open to explore compared to something like the Baker House or Castle Dimitrescu we have seen recently. It's mainly laid out with two separate wings that sandwich the main loft area and save room. Along with that, it also has a basement, attic and courtyard, which feels like such a perfect nod back to the Spencer mansion. Both of the wings of the building feature their own theme of sorts. The west wing has facilities like a kitchen, bathroom, dining room and a bar/lounge area. And as for the east wing, this features various medical rooms, staff quarters and offices. Within these various rooms and hallways, Resident Evil Requiem features a very unique take on the typical zombie enemy. This was hyped up by Capcom prior to launch, as zombies here can retain certain memories and habits from their life prior to infection, which really creates some unique gameplay moments and environmental storytelling pieces. For example, I was able to find a cleaner zombie who continued to vigorously clean the care center. This cleaner zombie will also attempt to clean Grace if she isn't careful. Multiple of these zombies obsessed with light switches can be found. It seems like their job was to keep all the light switches off. Singing zombies can also be found in the bar and conference room. These zombies still like to sing and dance like they once did. And there is also many other examples, such as the butcher zombie, along with these doctor and patient zombies. And all of these enemies behave and act differently depending on what their life was like prior to infection. If you can spot their weakness, you can use it against them, which I think is a clever bit of game design. This helped keep a pretty well done enemy type, like the zombie, fresh and new, and I feel like this game would be much worse off without these unique enemy types, especially for Grace's gameplay. Outside of just the enemies here, there is a great deal of environmental storytelling found throughout the care center. Learn about the care center staff, their experiments, and Dr. Victor Gideon while exploring through finding notes was classic Resident Evil, and it was a really nice bit of immersion I appreciate from these games. Given the unique personalities of the zombies, this gives the player a further realization of how impactful Umbrella and their viruses are. Seeing these zombies clinging to their past lives through their actions or even their speech hit me like a truck and brought more weight to the game's combat. These enemies felt so human compared to typical mindless flesh eaters, and that is only really found in Resident Evil 9. In terms of other enemies found within the care center, Grace also has to deal with multiple stalker enemies. Two of these are more so pseudo-stalkers, those being Chunk within the East Wing and the Butcher Zombie in the West Wing. Both of these guys patrol their areas and are avoidable or even killable given you have the needed resources. However, the true stalker of the care center is Marie. Shown long ago during the game's reveal, this large creature towers over Grace, and our first encounter with her perfectly sets up the care center. Marie is easily the scariest part of this entire game. I especially love her sound design. The sounds of her large shackles and chains dragging along the floor notify you that she is nearby, reminding you that you are nearly out of time. Marie is seen during the care center's intro section, along with the care center's most terrifying part, the basement. While we have to face off against countless horrors beyond our comprehension, Grace can find multiple save rooms that deliver a much needed breather. The game's save theme I'm a big fan of. It does exactly what a save theme should, provide comfort to players after experiencing the horrors of the game. While I do wish the music was louder and more pronounced like all their titles had it, the melody here is one of my favourite modern day save themes, and I've had it on repeat since launch. Through the main save room, Grace can meet Emily, a young blind girl who seems to have been experimented on by Victor Gideon. Emily is a really important character in terms of the lore behind the care center and behind Grace Ashcroft's own personal growth, and I absolutely loved Emily so much. She is just so precious and I only wanted to keep her safe. While unlocking more and more of the care center, you can find and open many hidden and extra areas that feature special items and loot. Exploration is also encouraged due to the game's shop system. Another bit of RE7 DNA seen in RE9 is this shop system. Grace can find antique coins all throughout the care center, which will allow her to purchase stabilizer upgrades to boost her stats, or upgrades to her inventory space, or even her blood collection capacity. While it isn't essential to go for these upgrades, I liked that it was sort of a secondary objective I had in mind while playing. I always had it in the back of my head that I need to visit the parlour to purchase a new upgrade. And as you are exploring, you will notice that the atmosphere of the care center is really well done. The loud sounds of rain crashing up against the windows as you venture through its corridors and hallways always gave me such a tense feeling. The horrible weather outside reflected the awful monsters inside, and I really liked that parallel. There was always some ambient noises heard as you explore, the sounds of people walking around above you or neighbouring rooms, and it always made me feel on edge. I never really felt safe within the care center, aside from its save room of course. I never felt like I'd killed every enemy, as at any moment more enemies would show up, or deceased corpses would reanimate as blister heads. I really love this approach to the atmosphere, as it made the care center hostile and all that more memorable. Grace's tense anti-horror gameplay is also briefly broken up by our second playable protagonist, Leon S. Kennedy. Multiple times from the start of the game throughout the care center, there is natural points showing what Leon is up to and why he is here, and his gameplay is balls to the walls action. While it doesn't open up to the player until the game's second half, these brief 15-minute sections are great at letting off steam and tension built up during Grace's horrifying moments. Leon can use many brutal melee attacks and execution moves, thanks to his newfound hatchet. Fans familiar with RE4 Remake will recognise the melee attacks and parries here, all while there is new additions to his combat, such as environmental attacks, usable enemy weapons, and firearm executions. These sections of gameplay are all perfectly placed through the game's first half. We first get control of Leon after the tense opening in the Renwood Hotel. We then gain control of him after the initial chase sequence with Marie. And again, we swap to Leon as Grace braces herself and heads into the care center's basement. So either before or after really tense moments, we get to go and just slaughter some enemies as Leon. And actually, prior to launch, I was worried about how this balance of survival horror and action horror would be handled, and I feel like RE9 did it correctly. There is also this sense of interconnectivity within the care center between Grace and Leon. Certain areas can only be opened by Grace, and certain items can only be found by Leon. You also have the choice as Grace to leave supplies or enemies around for Leon to deal with. And this feels like a sort of pseudo version of the zapping system from the original RE2, albeit a very toned down version. Nonetheless, I still really appreciate it. As for Leon's story here, Leon is tied up in this game as suddenly survivors of Raccoon City have started turning up dead with strange black marks on their body. Those same black marks have started to appear on both Leon's body and his partner in crime, Sherry Birkin. Leon heads to the Renwood Hotel when he sees Victor leaving with Grace, which causes him to pursue them both to the care center. When Leon first encounters Victor, we hear briefly about something called Umbrella's Curse, which is in reference to Leon's sickness. Through the care center, Leon learns that him and Sherry's illness is a mutation of the T-virus, known as the Raccoon City Syndrome. Long dormant T-virus cells mutate, and over time, they begin to infect the host, causing black growths on their body, and eventually killing the host outright. As well as that, Grace is somehow involved with all of this, including something called Elpis. I really did like how they brought both the T-virus and Raccoon City back into the game's story here, and dubbing this sickness Umbrella's Curse I think is badass. As for Leon himself, in these brief sections, Nick Apostolidis returns, and he is incredible. He is easily my favourite actor for Leon, and I'm so glad he returned after his amazing performance in RE4 Remake. Leon is rough and rugged here, all while he still retains his sense of humour and crappy jokes. However, that's all we really get for Leon's sections now. As for Grace herself, she is extremely scared and skittish as the game begins, even tripping around and falling on herself while running away from enemies. When she takes on the responsibility of protecting Emily, I feel like her character shifts into a more protector role. Emily is grabbed by Maria at this stage, and Grace is faced with the option to pursue after them down into the care center's basement. The old Grace would probably have turned around and ran, but now she puts aside her own fears in order to go after Emily. Going down now into the care center's basement, the disparity between its above ground floors and here is staggering. Its pale white and grey walls and floors and bright lights are traded for muddy, dark and metallic cell blocks. Everything down here is so mechanical and hostile. Within the basement's gloomy darkness, Marie is stalking around. While you don't spend much time down here, the time you do spend here will have you wishing you're back above surface. Saving Emily and leaving the care center, Grace again shows a great bit of bravery and protectiveness over Emily. She throws herself into the unknown in order to obtain helicopter keys to escape with Emily, which in true Resident Evil fashion, things don't go to plan. Grace is being built up by being put into this protector role, and after her final confrontation with Marie, she unfortunately learns that not everyone can be saved. In a truly heartbreaking moment that again demonstrates the incredible range that Angela Saltalbano brings to Grace, Emily mutates into a horrific abomination that is then put down by Leon, all while Grace begs him not to.
No, that's Emily! It's Emily!
I'm sorry.
This completely destroys her. Her mindset here mirrors that of Leon's in RE2 Remake. Young, naive, and hopeful that everyone can be saved, all while putting the entire blame on herself. With Emily's death on her conscience, Grace wanders off. Defeated and lost, she is reunited with Victor Gideon, and we see a new yet familiar character introduced, along with the conclusion of the game's first half. Here, Zeno is introduced. In his design, mannerisms, voice, and even abilities, he is essentially a clone of Albert Wesker. Zeno is working for the connections, and seemingly both him and Victor need Grace for something within Raccoon City. So this then closes Grace's story for a few hours. So then begins the start of the game's second act, along with our second protagonist's campaign, if you will. With Leon's condition worsening by the minute, he heads to Raccoon City to seek answers for his and Sherry's illness, and to learn about this thing called Elpis. Kicking it into high gear, I love the change in pace we get from just this cutscene alone. The backing track has this government agent sound to it, and while Sherry tries to dig further into Elpis, we get a sense that there is more to Elpis than we may believe. Arriving in the now destroyed and desolate Raccoon City, we are given the simple task of heading to its centre, where Victor and Grace are. We are then led out into Raccoon City's large open and abandoned streets. While Leon's gameplay is balls to the walls intense action, there is something just so unsettling about Raccoon City in this game. Maybe it's just how large and open it is. Or maybe it's the brief peaks of sunshine over its tall buildings that cast heavy shadows over the place. Or it's the emotional toll the location has taken on Leon. But I just absolutely loved exploring Raccoon City. Despite it being a location we have spent many games in prior, it still felt fresh, new and exciting, while also still feeling like the Raccoon City I know and remember. Having played through the events of its outbreak back in Resident Evil 2 and 3, it's so surreal to see the after effects of those games' endings. And the vibes Capcom captured here with this iteration of Raccoon City are so unique to the franchise. In Raccoon City, we get our first taste of a recurring theme that starts with this portion of the game, that being very familiar boss fights. As our first boss fight here is a large spider. After that fight, Leon's gameplay finally opens up to the player. We see a shop system return, similar to the one present in RE4. Unfortunately, there is no charismatic merchant to sell us goods. It seems like ChatGPT took the merchant's job. Killing enemies earns Leon credits. With these credits, he can use them to upgrade his weapons, purchase new guns, armor, or supplies. We actually have a gunsmith system here, with Leon being able to purchase various parts and attachments for his guns, from larger magazines, higher rates of fire, scopes to increase accuracy, or even special little charms that give weapons bonus stats. And like I mentioned, new weapons are also available to purchase. Leon's progression feels much more standard, especially compared to Grace's, although his weapon progression feels like a diet version of RE4, since all of his weapons and upgrades are available to purchase right away. Raccoon City is set up as a non-linear sort of area. We need to find 3 parts to a detonator, along with a fuel can to access certain parts of the city. The order you go about gaining these items is mostly up to you. In addition to our main objectives, there is also some nice loot and upgrades that can be found off the beaten path, including my favourite gun in the entire game. The Marksman 1A is seriously the best weapon in this game, and it can be found in a random supply container. Finally getting to spend some decent time as Leon, and I absolutely love his gameplay. It does, like I said, feel very alike RE4 Remake. But with the new features I mentioned earlier, and his hatchet that he can repair whenever, it does remove practically all tension from his combat. Even playing on the hardest base game difficulty, Classic, I found no issues with most of his combat encounters. And that's not really a bad thing either. Crushing enemies pretty easily is what I expect from a veteran Leon Kennedy. Leon's combat is just extremely satisfying to perform. His axe parries and executions are so satisfying, and they have a great weight to them. Nearly all of the guns in the game are viable and are really satisfying to use. And his gameplay is a really tight package overall, and it makes me want to play even more Resident Evil games with this gameplay system. As for the enemies we will fight as Leon, the zombies in RC carry on the trait of having unique looks and personalities, like the zombies seen in the care center. The zombies here, however, are much more decayed compared to the freshly infected care center staff. These zombies appear closer to walking skeletons more than anything. Their weapons are various forms of rebar or steel poles, and they really match with this environment, aside from these odd spiky zombies that somehow have working chainsaws. But they are so badass, I'm not even going to complain. It seems like the BSAA were also after Elpis. Sometime before Leon arrives, they were able to set up these micro camps around the city, which is why zombified BSAA soldiers can be seen. BSAA soldier zombies add a bit of challenge compared to the regular zombies. These zombified soldiers still retain some of their combat skills, as they are able to wield submachine guns, blindly firing a barrage of bullets towards Leon. They can also manage mortar strikes, and they can choose to run at you with hand grenades, which always made me panic like crazy. While playing through these sections of Raccoon City, I felt like these parts were greatly inspired from The Last of Us, in both its gameplay to some degree, along with its environment/layouts. And now I'm not saying The Last of Us invented apocalyptic city environments, but many of these areas felt straight up Last of Us-esque, which isn't a bad thing since that game is incredible. A gameplay section that sticks out as especially Last of Us-esque is when Leon goes through a half turned over, ruined building. Here we have to avoid falling elevator shafts, walk along glass windows, and dodge falling debris, and this part was fucking awesome, and it really put into perspective the damage that Umbrella inflicted upon this city.
If not for Umbrella, it could have just been a normal city.
When I got a moment to look over the city, its calm and quiet atmosphere gave me goosebumps. A city that we last seen in total chaos was now at a standstill. The music in this section was mostly muted, but I don't mind that, as the quietness only added to the surreal feelings I felt while exploring. Granted that this is a long stretch of the game, the colours and visuals don't alter too much. A lot of Raccoon City will feature beige, brown, greyish colours, and I like that a lot, although others might find it visually boring. Something that can be seen across Leon and even Grace's sections is the sheer detail in the game's weapons system. All of the guns are beautifully animated. They're all incredibly accurate to their real life counterparts. and they have many extra animations thrown in for just sheer detail, which in addition makes these weapons all that more satisfying to blast enemies with. And the weapon system is one of my personal favourite aspects of Resident Evil Requiem. With this crazy arsenal Leon gets, you may expect that to be the furthest that this game pushes towards all-out action. Well, I have two words for you: motor, bike. Upon collecting all of the detonator parts and blowing a hole in the wall, we are treated to a scripted gameplay section which has Leon driving a motorbike, all while he is pursued by a new zombie dog mutation and Victor Gideon himself. The driving is mostly scripted, with players having to focus their attention on shooting the zombie dogs and Victor. But for just a scripted spectacle scene, it's fucking awesome. Leon drives up through the destroyed Raccoon City highway, even taking it to a further extreme by driving up the side of a skyscraper and flying off the top of it. Keep in mind, he is nearly 50 years old and is rapidly dying from a T-virus mutation. The motorbike section comes to an end with a very Batman Dark Knight-esque head-to-head with Victor, which Leon wins.
Should've worn a helmet.
And now we come to a very big moment within Resident Evil Requiem: Leon's emotional return to the Raccoon City Police Department. Leon's PTSD is shown here. He sees quick glimpses and flashbacks to that night of the outbreak, and it was all really well done. I also like how this shows new fans the importance of this location for Leon, so newcomers to the franchise can get a gist of Leon's backstory. Finally seeing the now destroyed police department, it's honestly surreal. I never thought we would get to explore this location after RE2 and 3, and I'm so glad we do. The camera pans down here in a really cool homage to the original game's intro, and the music is just the cherry on top. The remixed version of the original RPG theme here is both beautiful but also haunting in a way. It has this sound of familiarity, but also this track is kind of melancholic, and when I first recognized this song, I was so happy Capcom remixed it. The RPD is very much a shell of its former self. Don't go in expecting to do puzzles and such in this area. One or two zombies can be found throughout its halls, and it's especially disturbing to see infected police officers still roaming around nearly 30 years later. My favourite part was easily going through the STAR's office. It felt so disturbing to explore a location like this after the city's destruction. Leon's PTSD is explored further through RPD, with him addressing Marvin Branagh when he comes to his desk in what is a really nice moment. Here we get a really niche and crazy cameo throwback to an older Resident Evil character. In certain spots of the downstairs area, just outside of the building, the legendary Tofu can be seen bouncing around. It's such an odd reference to have in a main game, and I love it. And I don't even care how strange it is. If you don't know what this large block of tofu is doing in the Resident Evil game, back in the original RE2, there was a side mode called the Tofu Survivor, which was meant to be a parody of the Hunk scenario. Players essentially just play as a block of tofu. This then returned in the remake of RE2, and I'm so surprised to see tofu here in a main game story. Thoroughly exploring the rest of the RPD, you won't find much else, aside from a cool little Easter egg hunt that was left behind by Barry Burton for his fellow STARS members. Despite this section not lasting too long, man, there was just something so ethereal about exploring such an iconic location in this destroyed state. Not only is it emotional for Leon, it's also emotional for the player and longtime fans of the series. The music, like I said, perfectly captures that feeling. Coincidentally, both Zeno and Grace are also seen in the RPD, and through their interaction, we learn more about Emily and supposed clones that Umbrella was making in order to replicate Grace herself. Which brings us to kind of a standstill in the game's pacing. We get to play a small section as a young girl named Chloe. Here we play a very familiar game of hide and seek within the Raccoon City orphanage, which is very much in the same vein as Sherry's section in RE2. On a first playthrough, this was great, as it reintroduced more horror elements after the last few hours of gameplay was all over the top action. And some of the scares here really got me bad, but on repeat playthroughs, this section is just a pain. Learning about all these little kids that were experimented on in order to duplicate her, Grace doesn't take this news well. Again, we see her naive mentality of blaming everything on herself. After she collapses to the floor, we see just how alike Zeno is to Albert Wesker, with him having almost the exact same abilities. In another throwback to classic Resident Evil 2, a tyrant bursts through the ceiling and pursues Leon, just like old times. And again, this bit of fanfare I'm a sucker for, although this chase sequence is very brief. Leaving the RPD, you can explore even more familiar locations, such as the RPD parking lot, which features a really cute reference to Ada Wong. Heading through Kenlo's gun shop, we get to see more of Leon's trauma and PTSD as he recalls what happened to Robert Kendo the night of the outbreak. Heading into Kenlo's shed, where we last seen him, it is perfectly emotional and motivating. Leon is still clearly beating himself up over what happened that night. However, it gives him this drive to save Grace and not let something like that happen again. In yet another throwback, Leon faces off against the good old super tyrant boss. The fight itself is pretty standard, although it's cool to see a now more experienced and veteran Leon parry a tyrant's attacks pretty easily. After the tyrant is put down, Leon heads through the orphanage as we set off to find Ark, an Umbrella lab hidden beneath it, the same one seen within the Chloe flashback. Supposedly this is where the Elpis virus is hidden. Deep within Raccoon City's underground, large plant growths and tentacles have taken hold of the entrance to Ark, with Leon having to face off against yet another familiar boss. Plant 43 blocks our path into Ark, very similar to Plant 42 seen within the Spencer Mansion and Guest House in RE1 Remake. Defeating this overgrown beast, we now head into Ark as we come towards the game's conclusion. Of course, we get another classic Resident Evil staple of ending the game in a secret laboratory. However, I find the plot point of Ark a little forced in a way. It just seems to me a little shoehorned in that there is a second giant laboratory underneath Raccoon City, but I suppose this was done to give the game a reason to end in Raccoon City. Ark itself, I like its layout and design. It looks gorgeous, but it is a very tried and true Resident Evil lab design, if that makes sense. Within Ark, we see this game's action sections taken up a notch, with us fighting human enemies, which thankfully this is literally just 2 encounters, as that's really pushing this game towards something like RE5 and 6, in a bad way in my opinion. Although I will say the elite guards that we fight are pretty sick. Shortly after this cover shooting section, we get yet another cameo from a legacy character. That may be one of my favourite moments from the entire game. Leon comes head to head with the legend that is Hunk. In a fight that mirrors the Krauser knife fight from RE4, Leon faces off against this series icon in a melee battle, and this seriously had me so hyped up. It's insane seeing a character I love like Hunk face off against a character like Leon. It's pure fan service, but I loved every second. His fight isn't too long as it's just a simple game of parry and attack, but there is some really cool dialogue between these characters, with Hunk seemingly knowing who Leon is, along with him trying to replicate his infamous neckbreak move. While it's not as deep as the Krauser fight, I really love this section, and it was so exciting to see 2 series legends duke it out. Ultimately, we do best Hunk. However, given his name is Human Unit Never Killed, if players leave the arena and return, they will discover that his body is missing, which is so perfectly Hunk. It really is also up in the air if this is actually Hunk, since he is named the commander in the game. However, I choose to believe that he is, and that he is still alive. Leon finally finds both Grace and Zeno again, alongside Elpis, which is locked behind a password that allegedly Grace herself is the key to unlocking. Zeno mentions how the connections seem to be more involved in this story than you may initially think. And yeah, I was kind of wondering when Capcom were going to do something more with them, since they were introduced to Resident Evil like nearly 10 years ago. Leon tries, but ultimately fails to stop Zeno, as he is no match for someone with Wesker's abilities. And Grace in this scene doesn't hesitate to nearly off herself in order to stop Zeno from killing Leon. Her confidence here makes her seem unrecognizable to the terrified young girl from the game's intro. Leon and Grace make a very Resident Evil getaway from Zeno, although we will be returning to Elpis and him shortly. Leon's illness has really taken its toll on him, as he collapses and is knocked out for a few hours. When he comes to, Grace asks him why he would risk his life in his condition, and here we get an incredibly emotional scene, as Leon has a heart-to-heart with Grace. He begins to choke up while telling Grace about his past and about Raccoon City. He tells her about his grievances with how that night went down, and that his inability to save everyone still haunts him to this day. The backing track is perfectly harrowing, as Nick Apostolidis really shows how even a veteran Leon is still so damaged from those events. Leon is using his guilt as a drive to push himself in this story, and with Leon being very dead set in his ways, he still decides to go after Elpis and Zeno despite how badly messed up he is. With Grace now shown she has completed her arc, she wants to help Leon no matter what happens, with her dialogue here reminding me of a rookie Leon. And finally getting to briefly play as Grace, aside Leon, I absolutely loved it. One is a newcomer to the world of bioweapons, with still some naivety about her, and the other, a broken veteran who we as fans have played as and shaped over the past nearly 3 decades. This was a special motif of both new and old, and I really liked that. Now back playing as Grace, we get a brief stint as she searches through Ark. Grace is even faced with the iconic liquor enemy, which introduced some much missed tension to the end part of this game. Grace has also lost her Requiem here, so with just her pistol left, we are introduced to the bottles of acid item, which can take liquors out very effectively, so she isn't entirely helpless. Within Ark, Grace finds some very important info about Elpis and her own identity. Within the game's intro, back in Remwood, Grace finds a floppy disk her mother hid many years ago. Playing it now on this computer, we find interviews Alyssa Ashcroft conducted back in 2004 with none other than Oswald E. Spencer, the man responsible for most things within the Resident Evil world. Here, Spencer seems remorseful to a degree, almost regretful for his actions and research he conducted. Which, I'll be honest, I really didn't know how to feel about this initially. I mean, this man conducted awful inhumane experiments and caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their lives. So having him regretful of those actions was kind of a stretch, although it will make a little more sense in a bit. Cutting back to Leon now, and we can see that the Raccoon City syndrome has spread through a lot of Leon's body. His face is covered in black marks, and this even starts to bleed into his gameplay, as randomly Leon will go into coughing fits, all while his vision will start to blur. This is a really cool gameplay idea, as Leon is really reaching his limits. Leon's journey through this part of Ark is full of lickers and enemies, which are a piece of cake to him now, unlike back in the day. As Leon travels through Ark, his condition gets really bad. He is barely able to keep himself propped up, as his illness begins to worsen. This in a way mirrors his infection in RE4 Remake, and how he managed to desperately save himself and Ashley there. From when these bouts of coughing were introduced, I felt such a sense of dread and tension. I was really scared that Leon might not actually make it, and that was only amplified as Leon here is barely able to walk. Cutting back to Grace, she opens a video file labelled with simply her name. Alyssa and Spencer are discussing Elpis, which he seemingly created. He himself labels Elpis a blind hope, which doesn't seem like the description you would give a virus, as it's believed Elpis is. In comes a young baby girl. A researcher hands the baby to Spencer. Startled, Alyssa asks if that's a subject of his, to which it's revealed that it's simply just an orphaned baby girl, whom Spencer has adopted. This is a part of his feelings of guilt. Spencer calls this baby girl his hope, which we'll need to remember that line for later. This baby is Grace herself, revealing that Alyssa wasn't her birth mother. Shortly after Spencer's death in 2006, his butler informs Alyssa that Spencer wanted Alyssa to take full custody of the child, thus kicking off the rest of Grace's life as an Ashcroft. So suppose Spencer's guilt and redemption, you could call it, wasn't him trying to better himself or change for everyone he wronged. He wanted to simply leave something positive behind for his own conscience, a redemption for himself to himself, which makes much more sense than Capcom having Spencer actually try to be good. While Grace learns this life-altering news, we see that Leon is really at his end here. He is profusely vomiting up blood and he loses consciousness. Grace finds the half-dead Leon and they together go after Zeno and Elpis. Leon urges Grace to destroy Elpis no matter what, while she has a plan of her own. And now the player is prompted with two decisions: destroy Elpis or release Elpis. To put it simply, this game has two endings, a bad ending and a good ending. If you've paid attention to the story, notes, and especially the interview with Spencer, you will know that Elpis isn't actually a virus like Zeno and Victor believed. I'll quickly mention what happens in the bad ending. In it, Grace destroys Elpis, which does allow her to escape Ark, while it and Elpis are destroyed. However, in order for her to escape, Leon stays behind to face off Zeno, but in his condition, he's unable to do much. With the bad ending, Leon is killed at the hands of Zeno in a horrible point-blank execution, which Angela Saltambano performs her absolute best as showing Grace distraught over the scene. Seriously, I was half convinced they killed Nick Apostolidis in the recording booth right next to her. However, as just an ending in general, it's really lacking, and you can tell that this was the non-canon choice, given there was no final boss or anything. Grace just simply leaves Ark and says that she wished she could save Leon. This was actually the ending I got on my first playthrough, and when I hit the main menus, I was prompted by the game to go back and change my decision. Choosing to release Elpis, we hear Spencer and Alyssa's voice echo, as they both mention Grace being a hope of sorts. The password itself is hope, meaning all along we actually did know the password, since Alyssa says it in the beginning of the game. Zeno greedily grabs a vial of Elpis, believing it to be some sort of super weapon. In a very Wesker mannerism, he injects it directly into his neck, which reveals what Elpis really is. Elpis is simply a super antiviral that can cure any virus. Something that renders all bioweapons useless is, in a way, the ultimate bioweapon. Victor Gideon suddenly returns as him and Zeno have it out. Zeno and the Connections wanted a super weapon and feel betrayed, and Victor believes that Elpis is the ultimate chaos tool that was left behind by Spencer. We even get a reference here to Zeno being an Albert Wesker clone, which I really liked.
You are nothing but an imitation.
Zeno is abruptly beheaded by a mutated Victor, which I'm honestly really glad they killed him off. If Capcom actually brought back a Wesker clone of sorts to be a big series villain again, I would find that really lazy in my opinion. So Zeno being killed off like this, I'm a fan of. Grace then uses a vial of Elpis on Leon, which brings him back from his near-death status, which then leads us into the game's final boss, Victor Gideon, the last bit of Umbrella still left in this world. This first phase is pretty cool. Victor has a lot of really cool voice lines that show just how mad with power he is. Beating him, however, isn't the final fight. In what is a pretty disappointing and lazy move, Victor then returns as essentially the final nemesis form from RE3 Remake, which this is a complaint of mine with RE9 as a whole. Nearly all of its boss fights feel like a Resident Evil best of, as they're all mostly rehashes of the same concepts just done again. I mean, a giant spider, a tyrant, a giant plant, and now just final phase nemesis again. I really wish we saw more unique bosses and fights here, but hey, at least the gameplay is still fun. Going back to Nemesis Victor here, while that was actually a really good fight in RE3 Remake, in RE9 it's a much quicker and dumbed down version. With Leon's ability to parry basically anything, this fight becomes almost laughably easy. While it is repetitive and easy, I'm still all for giant sized bosses that conclude a Resident Evil game. The fight ends with some absolute badassery. Leon scales up Victor's arms and leaps into his chest and starts to hack away at him with his hatchet. And he finally blows him away with the Requiem and a crappy one-liner.
This time, you ain't getting back up.
In a very shocking end to things, there is actually a fake-out ending of sorts. A trapped Grace and Leon seem hopeless of escaping Ark, and as the lights shut off, Leon and Grace prepare to accept their fate as they sit and wait for the inevitable to happen. And what I didn't expect to follow was the fucking Hound Wolf squad from RE8 show up to save the day. One of its members directly addresses Leon, informing him that Captain Redfield has a message for him, which adds another classic Resident Evil character mentioned here. In an ultimately happy change of pace, Leon and Grace are found and saved by the Hound Wolf squad. Leon is returned to normal, along with Sherry now having a cure. Leon seems better than ever, and I really love the positive music here. I really wish I could listen to this outside of this cutscene, since it was just so uplifting. Now, I will say, the plot point of Emily actually being alive, I don't mind, as it gives Grace a really happy ending, but it does take a bit of the weight off that heartbreaking death scene earlier in the game. We end things with Leon walking off. He removes his gloves and places a ring on a very particular finger, although that's all I will say for that topic. We get a post-credits scene showing Grace now living her life at the FBI, as she seemingly has adopted Emily and is living her life as her carer, while also still keeping in touch with Leon, which is very sweet. And thus, Resident Evil Requiem is finished. And as the credits rolled, I was so happy that I got to experience this game. In a nutshell, Resident Evil Requiem is an incredible Resident Evil game that maybe suffers from a little too much familiarity in some parts, but overall, it's an incredible love letter to fans of this franchise. So many characters, references, and classic Resident Evil tropes are featured here, and Grace Ashcroft is a great new protagonist who I'm excited to see much more from. And Leon, well, I'm glad we got another game of his to see what he is up to in current time. Now, after finishing the game, something I noticed was, unlike prior Resident Evil games, Resident Evil Requiem features a surprising lack of post-game content, with just a few unlockable weapons, a single costume for both Grace and Leon, a higher difficulty mode, infinite ammo, Mr. Raccoons to shoot throughout the game, and so on. But the overall game doesn't really improve on consecutive playthroughs, and there isn't even a proper New Game Plus feature, which is really surprising. Now, it has been announced that RE9 will be getting new game modes and story DLC, so I'm excited to see if those can fix this issue with RE9. I'm currently on my 4th playthrough, and it really feels like RE9 is best done as a one playthrough experience, as all its story twists and scares will be fresh to you. Now, that being said, I'm still really enjoying my replays, as these games are always highly replayable. It's just not as replayable as other games in the franchise. As a part of the post-game content, we can access Grace's report in the game's menus, which is a 60-page document that more or less summarizes a lot of the history of Resident Evil, from its beginnings with Spencer in the 1960s up until modern day, and I absolutely love this idea. Having a large lore document for new fans to understand the game and franchise better, or for returning fans that are maybe a little rusty, is a great idea, and I feel like more large long-running franchises should do this. Now, there is some changes to some parts of the lore within this document, such as the connections seemingly being involved years and years ago, along with them pushing for the missile strike on Raccoon City, which contradicted our previous knowledge of these events. However, this is Grace's report, her own research and interpretation of these events based on what she knows, so it's possible that it's not actually how things are in universe, although it could be one way or the other. For my closing thoughts, Resident Evil Requiem is an incredible Resident Evil game that I feel will settle into the franchise nicely. It has its issues, such as the boss fights feeling kinda lacking and the post-game content being almost non-existent, but as a whole, it's a great celebration of Resident Evil, which is very fitting for its 30th anniversary. It features a lot of fan service, it almost has two very different types of Resident Evil games built into one, and it returns to some iconic locations. I'm very pleased with this game overall, and it's definitely up there with some of my favourite Resident Evil games to date. To put a number score on it, I think I would give Resident Evil Requiem a 9 out of 10. It is by no means flawless, but it's an incredibly solid entry. However, I really want to hear from you guys. What do you think of Resident Evil Requiem? What would you personally rate the game, and what do you think of my review? I'm sure with this game's huge success and DLC announcements, we're going to be getting so much more Resident Evil content, and I truly can't wait to make videos for you all. I quickly want to thank you so much for all the recent support on the channel, with me recently being accepted into the YouTube Partner Program, which is just mind-blowing that I achieved that. So seriously, thank you for watching my videos, for subscribing to me, for liking, commenting, everything. Seriously, thank you. That said, I will hopefully see you in my next video. Peace.
Should've worn a helmet.